Like her first.
Yeah, but she's
Ditto.
with the other organizations. They ain't doing much in our community, so we're gonna let them remain nameless.
Yeah.
Clearly, yeah, we're gonna leave them alone. I don't know what stand for children they doing, but they ain't standing for my children.
Well, she's empowering them.
I agree 100% with what David is saying around Ashley, and I think that she's from the community, and I always try to say for us, by us, is a big difference,
Yes.
and that's super important. To add to that, I also feel like parents sometimes have to move away from tradition. I think oftentimes parents send their kids, oh, this is where I went to school, so it was fine, and they'll be fine. And I just feel like times are changing, and we can't expect that the same things that happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago, unfortunately, are the same things that are happening now. And we've got to dig a little deeper as we decide what's the best choice for our students. Second, 100% what Marshall's saying is take the tour, visit, go to an open house, sit down and talk to the school leaders. As David has said about relationships, like make sure you feel safe with the person that you're going to drop your kid off with every day. That matters. Our kids matter, and they deserve that time.
Robert, did you want to add anything? I'm gonna throw another question that's not even on here. This is like become so important to me and something that I want to explore more because we talk about it from the parent perspective. But then, how do we empower students to advocate for choice? Because they oftentimes are aware that they are not receiving the best education where they are, and sometimes they're not aware that they're not receiving the best education. But I think one thing that we need to start looking at elevating more is that student voice, because they're the ones that are most affected by it. And so how do we begin to empower students to advocate for school choice? Anybody want?
So for me, we want to create the next generation who can advocate for themselves and for others and for vulnerable populations. So I think it begins with a curriculum that allows students to explore their own voices and to do research and be able to speak for themselves. So as educators, it's not our job to decide what they think, but to teach them how to think and to have positive discourse. And so I think that's a really important piece. The second thing is, as a high school leader, some of my kids will be voting soon, and just making sure that they're registered to vote, that they understand the process. And then they need to also understand some of the historical some things that have happened historically that have prevented the Black voice from being represented. And I feel like I'm preparing the next politicians of the future. And so just making sure that they have that awareness. And they honestly can, and I've been really proud to see that some parents, some of our kids are advocating for school choice. Like they're signing up for their own tours. They're signing up to speak about their school and things like that. So anytime we can empower them, we're creating really good global citizens, and that's one of the things that are near and dear to our network of schools.
You might want to add anything to that. So Roland Martin was here 2 years ago, and he did the tour. Yeah, it was December 2017.
Wow. 2018.
Well, that's 2 years. So that's 2 years.
Yeah,
I said 3.
yeah.
2 years ago, he did. School choice is the Black choice. And so this next question kind of really captures what his thought behind school choice is Black choice, because everybody thought it was something different. But from his perspective, what he was saying, and I agree, is that we need more leaders of color in positions of authority, where there's CMOs, authorizers. How do we increase the number of African Americans leading non-traditional schools? Because that's where our power really is going to come from, is us being in those positions of authority, whether it's a CMO. Shout out to Robert. I have to shout you out because you have done something that is unheard of in this city. By starting Vanguard and going against the grain and not being up under the mayor's office and just kind of doing your own standalone thing as a charter. And so my hat goes off to you. I wanted to do that fellowship.
Appreciate it.
Years and years ago. So shout out to you for doing that, because that takes a lot to step out and say, hey, I'm going to establish my own kind of school independent from the charter as the mayor's office as a charter, the state. So yeah, shout out to you for
Appreciate that.
taking the lead on
you
that.
Remember when I had hair and hair in my beard?
Yes. So yeah, shout out to you for doing that, because that takes a lot. And you're not standing alone. You have us to back you and support you.
I appreciate that. And to your point, just about the need for more leaders of color, that was really the catalyst, one of the biggest catalysts behind me saying, hey, I've got to do something, because there weren't enough of us in the city at that time that were standing up and leading our own schools. I think some of the other organizations in the city have done a better job over the course of the years, and particularly in the last 3 years, of adding more leaders of color. I think where we're still challenged at are, and I fully recognize, as your theme song said, girls rule the world, but there aren't enough African American males that are founding and leading schools here in our city, or in our state for that matter. I feel like when Rick and I came through, we were like number 4 and 5 in the state's history, and it's been almost 20 years of opening charter schools. And so and shout out to Shaquan, and to Marcus, who's no longer in the NB, and Earl Phelan, of course. And so part of our model is training up our staff to become those next school leaders. We got one gentleman that has an opportunity to step into leadership next school year. We're excited for him and that opportunity.
Is that my cousin? Sanders?
No,
oh, okay.
No. It's Mr. Thomas.
Okay.
Who I brag about, because he was he was an engineer and was a non-traditional, switched over into teaching, and at his previous school they had him teaching gym. I had the same face when he came in for his interview, and I was like,
what?
Hey, what are you teaching?
He's an engineer, and they had him teaching
gym? They had
gym?
him teaching gym.
Because that's where they pigeonhole us.
And
Like
they were
that.
sending
He should have been teaching science, math.
which is what he's teaching at Vanguard right now.
Yep.
Because he's an engineer, right? And he
Right.
was able to take those complex...
Which is where charter
things-
comes in, because they don't have to have the same standards when it comes to teachers teaching. They can go ahead.
He's
anyway.
licensed. He's
licensed,
Yeah,
but I'm saying you have the flexibility
we have the
to
flexibility,
put people with real life experience in front of them.
I think where I was going with this is the push is for some of those schools that are not led by leaders of color to make sure that they are putting people in color in position to grow and to win. And for us as leaders of color to be able to do the same for the folks under us. We know that the accountability and the stakes are higher. Like if we mess up, that possibly shuts the door for somebody else that looks like us. And so we want to lift as we climb. So.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that?
I 100% agree. One of the things that I'm super passionate about is developing leaders of color. We hire them, we take them, even if they're not always have the pedigree that they're always looking for, to say that, to green light us, to say that we're ready. And also just really passionate about not pigeonholing leaders of color on discipline and culture. I require that all of our leaders understand academics and be able to coach on the academic side, because I know the only way that they are going to continue to rise and launch their own networks or launch their own schools or become superintendents is if they understand academics and not just discipline. And unfortunately, historically, we have been pigeonholed to be the overseers, per se, for lack of better words, of our children, especially in these larger networks. And I think that's a trend that is changing and has to change. And as we start to see more leaders of color in the top seat, that trend will continue to look a little bit different. The other thing I just want to highlight is I still think we have a ways to go with networks being led by leaders of color.
Yep.
There are some single site charters in our city. I believe Tinley is the only network that runs multiple schools that is led by a leader of color. I know some of the other single site leaders of color are thinking about expansion right now, and I'm like 100% behind them and support that wholeheartedly, because until we start having networks and multiple schools and the K-12 continuum of schools for us by us, we will continue to be pigeonholed to some extent and at the mercy of people who don't have the same level of investment in our schools as we do.
Yeah, that's why I love Steve Perry,
Love it
because he
all.
doing his thing.
I wanted to make a quick, my friend India had a point of clarification. She said there are actually more male school CEOs than there are black female CEOs in our city.
I believe that. That's
but-
what I try to throw out there.
But I totally agree with Kim. I also think there's other people to hold accountable. I think funders, they've been amazing. All of our funders at Purdue are amazing, and we love you. But funders, I love would continue to encourage them and push them to hold people accountable. One thing that I really appreciate too, because the leader of our network is a white man, but he continues to use his privilege to elevate voices and leaders of color. But I think it's also important for, and I know this is a really hard thing to do, but some of those white leaders need to think about their privilege. I wish. Well, I'm trying not to go too far and talking crazy.
But let's go there.
Okay, let's go there. But at some point, they have to say, it's my turn to step down and get the next generation.
I agree.
People of color, yeah.
And say, let me train up. And I hate to use train up because we are very well trained as leaders of color. But let's say, you know what? I've had a lot of privilege. I've gotten to this position. It's my turn to step down. And I think we're going to see that happen a bit more, but I think that people, money speaks. And so until funders are saying, I'm not funding you unless you do that, which a lot of funders we work with are doing that now. And I think some nonprofits might need to be held accountable too for also representation.
The only thing I missed that I want to add is to like double click on what Marshall said about your board. I think that a lot of our boards have to be more diverse as well. And if we don't have, because the board is the true decision making body of any of our entities.
Right.
And until those boards also reflect us, to Kiana's point, Kiana sparked it with the funder piece, but until the funders and the boards also reflect us, we will continue to be puppet masters per se in this game of education.
Yeah, shout out to Ignite, because when I left, he had an all black board, and I know he's trying to diversify, but the majority of the board members were African American, helping him lead that school from the behind the scenes perspective. So shout out to Shaquan Eli.
Most founders of color have been diligent in making sure that all of our boards reflect the students that we serve.
And that's something I'm proud of at Purdue too. Our boards are very racially diverse and just includes it really reflects our student population.
Did you want to add anything
I think when you going back to the question you asked, when I think about just personally, sitting here with Kim and Robert, and there's two things that I highlight. So you said the courage to step out and to do it, no one's doing it. I think Kim spoke about it. Like, the one thing you also got to have is you got to have the pedigree, the background, right? As an African American, they're going to pigeonhole you somewhere, right? So here's two things you better bring. You better have the courage to step out on faith, and you better bring the data. And shout out to Kelly Marshall, who taught me right. Exactly. No matter where you go, you better have the data. Yep. And so when I think about personally, what am I trying to do? Trying to educate kids, number one. But if I have ambitions personally, the first thing I got to do is got to get the data, because I won't elevate to the seat because of society and what they see with a black man leading school. But if you bring the data and you have the courage to step out there, then they can't stop you. And so you better have the data and you better have the courage. And I think that's the way we can increase it.
And I agree with that, because I think sometimes, and two things. I think that what has helped me too as a leader is just being around such amazing other leaders and just supporting each other in the work. And I feel like that's unique to our culture, is to be supportive even though we're doing the same work. And also just having the confidence, because sometimes as people of color, we're it's ingrained in us to second guess ourselves, and we have people doing the same job with less experience, less all of that. So I think just some encouraging of sometimes you got to encourage yourself.
Y'all know that's right. You better speak over yourself. That's what Donna Lawrence says.
Amen.
Speak over yourself. Yeah. Shout out to Patrick Jones, who's bringing leaders of color with Melanated Ed. So he's providing that space where.
Love that, man.
Yes, leaders of color can come together and just like you said, support one another, lean on one another for expertise and advice. And
Patrick's also done a good job of fighting to bring in other organizations. So Carmita, Seaman, and Surge are coming soon, and I know that it was a long fight to seal that deal, and I think that there's a change coming, and that feels good.
Awesome. So to end our conversation for today, I want to end with this question. What's considered a high quality school? Because this becomes also a topic of discussion when we talk about school choice. A lot of times charters are not looked at as a high quality school. And so Let's talk about that real quick. What's considered a high quality school? What's considered a high quality education? I think we're still trying to define that in this space of what is a high quality education or a high quality school outside of just receiving a letter grade of an A, because we know that just because you receive a letter grade of an A does not necessarily mean that you are a high quality school. Period. Whether it's a district school,
especially not in 2020.
Yeah.
Or high performance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or
the
high
scores
performance.
don't matter.
Yeah. Well, so what is that? What does that look like, real quick, briefly? Anybody want to tackle that real quick?
So for me, on a high school level specifically, I'm graduation rate is a